Okay, so yeah, how to record butterflies with Jan Miller. Right. Okay, brief outline. I've sort of covered this just now, really. So I'll give a little précis of what the basics of a record are, and Ashton will go into how to actually submit records to us. And there's lots of different systems that you can use. So Ashton will explain exactly what the best one is to use. Here you can pose questions in the chat, as I've said. And then part two is the main section where Jan will give us a lot more detail about recording butterflies in North Wales. And then we'll have a bit of a roundup, maybe open mic session with questions. Sometimes a lot easier if you've got a very complicated question to actually say it out loud rather than to type it into that chat function there. Right. Okay, I think somebody's got a microphone on. Maybe you, Jan.
Yes. Do you want me to turn it off?
Knock it off. Great, thanks. Okay, so what is a record? Well, we like to think of records as these 4 W's. So the first W is the what. Well, what is it you've actually seen? So in our case, we've seen a comma butterfly, Polygonia sea album. So you can either record it using its common name, comma, or its scientific name, Polygonia sea album. So that's quite critical for a record, so we know what it is. And the next W is the location. So where have you seen it? Well, there's good tips and conventions to use. So try to use a sort of town name or an ordnance survey grid reference name. Things like the Great Orme, well-known site, but try and avoid things like my garden. You often see that on records submitted, and okay, it means a lot to you as an individual recorder, but a subsequent person looking at your data in 20, 50 years' time might not find my garden that informative, really. So try to use something that's more generic, like a town name or a site name or something like that. And obviously a grid reference is even better. So try and use a GPS or pick it from a slippy map online like we have on the Cofnod systems, or even a mobile phone app now will give you a really nice grid reference. Third W is the when. So obviously we like to know when you've seen something. Best to put it as exact as possible. So give it a day, month, year. You might only know the month if it's something that you've jotted down on a notebook years ago and you still want to submit that record. You're not quite sure of the day, put it down as the month. It still might be an important record. So say you've seen an unusual butterfly and just jotted it down in a notebook, but you can't quite remember. Maybe you only know the year. Still a useful record. So you could either put it as the season, the year, or even the month. But we prefer you to put it as the full date if at all possible. Then the last W is name of the person. So that's either your full name or maybe a contraction of it. Or if you don't actually know who it is, just use the convention anon. So like as with the sites, don't put me because it is fairly meaningless to somebody else. Right, so there's lots of different reasons people do recording, and probably the main one for most of us is personal interest. It's just an interesting thing to do, and you can go out and jot down what you've seen, and it's always nice to peruse what you've seen last year, compare it with what you've seen this year. But there are other reasons for recording, of course, and it sort of ticks many boxes. So there's conservation reasons for recording. A record done by yourself may not be that important by itself, but when you group them with other people's records, then it starts to become very informative. So we can see changes throughout the years. Has conservation management actually changed how frequent a species is on the site, or even possibly management has been problematic for a species and you see declines. So without those records, we can't actually get a handle on that. And then a lot of the species records will feed into national recording atlases. So there's no way one person or even a regional group of recorders can make a full UK map of species distributions throughout time. So that's where we can pool our data with other recorders across Britain to get some really informative maps. And then, of course, there's planning decisions. If we don't know where things are, people that are actually making the decisions for planning can't take these things into account. So there's no point moaning to a council and saying, oh, why didn't you think of this rare butterfly at this site if you never told anybody about it? So get those records to us and they'll actually feed into the process. And then the people that make the decisions then can at least take these things into account. So it's all crucial things. So what's nice about recording is that it does satisfy a lot of demands from professionals as well as amateurs. So brilliant, really. So what do you want to record? Well, really, pretty much everything, I suppose, is the answer. But rarities are always nice to record because everybody likes to see something they don't see very often. So it's a bit of a strange thing because many people routinely record rarities, but often ignore common things like cabbage whites or things that are everyday occurrences. But they're actually quite useful to record simply because things can change over time. So species that were once rare can become common. So things like the common butterfly in Scotland a few years ago, great rarity. Now it's just starting to appear in Scotland, and that mapping of that change is important. So similarly in Wales, where Jan will tell us about species that are coming into our area anew, and we want to see how that spreads. And without that baseline data of when it first appeared, when it appeared next, we can't really map that. Right, I'm sorry. Okay, so I did say record everything. Well, you can go extreme with this. So realistically, if it's a really common species, you don't want to record it every hour of every day. So maybe if it's something like a peacock butterfly, maybe one record a week in your garden would be enough. You'd probably something more unusual like a white letter hair streak, I would say record every single record of those that you see, and I'm sure Jan would agree with that. So you want to know how interesting is your record? Well, we're quite lucky in North Wales. We've got quite a few facilities we can use to actually check our records to see how they fit in with existing records. So a nice all Wales system is the Aderin system, and this is free to use. And this draws in records from across Wales, so all 4 record centres feed the data into this. And you can go on that website and type in the species name, and you'll get a map for the whole of Wales. So you might be interested to know, is it a new 10 km square record? Has it been seen in the area before? Or is it an under-recorded square that you might want to visit for butterflies and actually go and purposely visit it on a weekend to improve our knowledge of butterflies in that area? So Aderin's a brilliant site for that. There's a sort of homepage. You don't have to actually register. You can use it as it is. So you can do a what's in my area search or a distribution map based on the species or even a species group. So Lepidoptera or butterflies or so on and so forth. So the best thing to do is actually go on this website and have a go yourself. It's really nice. And we're even more lucky in North Wales. We've got this superb resource from Andrew Graham, North Wales Lepidoptera, and this is a remarkable piece of software online, really. So essentially all Wales, North Wales records that cover those vice counties of North Wales, including Montgomeryshire, are on there. So yeah, hours of fun looking at that record. So I won't go into the details of it, but just to make you aware that it exists and there's the URL. So if you've got a moment, do go on there and have a play. And then there's the NBN Atlas. That's another UK-wide. We've got a Wales portal, NBN Atlas Wales. That will also show records in a different format, so you could go there to check as well. So like I say, there's many different routes to having a look at wildlife data and butterfly data, but perhaps in North Wales, I think Andrew Graham's website is probably one of the better ones to use because it's got that local feel to it, and maybe Aderin, and then maybe the NBN Atlas if you want a an all Britain view of things. So there you go. Right, so that's just a very rough situation of how to record there. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass you over to Ashley. Okay. I might just answer this question that's popped in as it is relative to that. So somebody's Paul's actually said 4 Ws. Why isn't it 5? Because it should be the weather. Well, yeah, that's a good point, Paul. Actually, I think with butterfly recording, weather is quite a nice feature to actually mention on a record. So have you seen it on a sunny day or an overcast day, or what's the temperature? But yeah, up to you if you record that or not. I'm sure Jan will let us know whether that is a useful thing. I'm sure later in the talk. So I'll hand you over to Ashley and I'll go on silent. And
Richard, I think you need to allow me to share my screen. It doesn't seem to be.
Well, you're a co-host. Oh, no, you're not. Okay.
I think it's probably because of the way I've logged in.
Yeah, should be now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see that all right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to give a very quick overview of record submission to Cofnod. There are various different ways that your records might make their way to us and to Jan. So just to give you a bit of an introduction, and also to the breadth of butterfly data that we do hold on the database. So the Cofnod database is growing all the time. We're nearing 5 million records, but there's always lots more data out there, and it's interesting to look at the different species groups and see how they vary really across the database. So butterfly data, it's about 5.5% of our whole database at the moment, and we've got almost 300,000 records. As Richard said, using a website like a Darren can be useful. You can, by looking at that and looking at your local area, you can sometimes realize that the species you think will be already recorded, they actually haven't been. So it's always worth putting in the records from your local area. And on a Darren, you can get a list of all the species from a 1 kilometre square, so you can look specifically around your home patch if you like. The top 10 butterfly species in the Cofnod database are listed here. The meadow brown at the top, speckled wood, green veined white, just as a bit of an indication of the kind of data that we hold. But Jan will talk a lot more about the individual species in her talk in a moment. So how do records end up in the Cofnod database? Well, there's two means really: the online recording system or importing from spreadsheets. And there are other online portals, for example, iRecord, and we do access data from iRecord, but we have to download it from iRecord and import it so that it goes under the spreadsheet import category. So if you look at the whole database, there's over 90% of the records are imported from spreadsheets. With butterfly data, it's a bit higher than that actually, with only about 3% going through the online recording system. But still over 8,000 records, so still very important. So as I said, a small but important proportion are entered through the Cofnod online recording system. Individual recorders will use the standard entry form, which I'll show you in a moment. Sometimes they have their own dedicated forms, and if you need something specific, you just have to get in touch with us and we can set something up. We have organisations like the North Wales Wildlife Trust, Wildground and Natural Resources Wales. We have quite a number of staff of those organisations that use the online recording system to enter records from all species groups, including butterflies. So that's quite a nice way of data coming directly to us and coming in immediately and being immediately available to the county recorder. We have a small number of county recorders across the whole breadth of species groups that actually use the online recording system as their main database for records, including Jan for North East Wales butterflies. We have other county recorders that tend to manage their data in spreadsheets, and they send regular updates for import. And I think the dominant data set in the database for butterflies is the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme data, which is not surprising really. But it's followed closely by large county data sets like the one for North West Wales managed by Andrew Graham, and then this historic Vice County data sets as well, where county recorders have changed over time. We also have a copy of a large database of invertebrate records that NRW manage, which includes quite a few butterfly records. And as I said, if records go to iRecord, they do also come to us, but I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. A key thing to know is that many of the records which are entered by non-specialists do require verification, and this is where the county recorders such as Jan are invaluable in checking the data that comes to us. So in North East Wales, in Flintshire and Denbighshire Vice counties, we have Jan, and in North West Wales, we have Andrew Graham. The Vice counties, by the way, are a very old county recording system that is used throughout biological recording. And this is a map just showing the areas that they cover. So on our website, under the recording page, there's a local expert search, and you can look there if you want to find out who the local expert is for a particular taxon group for a particular area, and you can see these maps. So they show the Vice county boundaries, which are slightly different than modern day counties. So how to submit butterfly records to Cofnod? Well, the Cofnod ORS is a really good starting point for entering records, because you can enter records of lots of different species groups, and you can use it, in some instances, it's also used for a specific monitoring project. You can also send us an email attachment if you have data in a spreadsheet already. We wouldn't want you to go and try and then enter each record individually into the ORS. We can always import from a spreadsheet. I know Jan's going to mention the Lurk Wales app. Now that you can get details from the Cofnod website from the front page. It's linked to iRecord, so if you enter your records into that, it will go into the iRecord pot along with other records that go in through other elements of iRecord. So they have other apps. I think they have a specific butterfly recording app. So it kind of goes into one big pot, and we can download it and import it into our database on a regular basis. And it is becoming easier to do that regularly, whereas previously there was a long delay in being able to do that. But say perhaps within a month, we could probably download it and import it into our database. But not all county recorders use iRecord for verifying. So it depends on the individual whether they prefer you to put your records first into the online recording system or into iRecord. But yeah, the main message, I suppose, is that you shouldn't have to submit records in two places, and contact us to check if you're not sure. So I was just going to give you a very quick overview of the ORS, but if you have used it already, you might need to zone out for a moment. The ORS is about 14 years old, but we've got a new version about to launch in the next couple of months, which will be quite a bit quicker and more efficient and have a few more modern features in it. It was one of the first online recording systems of its type, actually. And the new version you'll be able to use from your smartphone in the field. So it's not an app, but it will work from your phone in the field if you have reception. So I think it will make it a lot easier to use to enter that record immediately that you see the species, because it is often hard to remember to do it when you come back home and sit down and open up the computer or whatever. So I think this should make a big difference really for people's use of the ORS. It's been designed and developed in-house, and we've as well as ad hoc records, there's lots of specific projects which are run on the ORS. That's what our website looks like, as you will know, and up at the top where you you can click register if you've not already registered to use the ORS. It only takes a moment. It can all be used on Gymraeg as well. You just click Gymraeg at the top and everything will work through Welsh. As the Welsh version of the home page there. So registering, it's just really your email address and your name, and setting up a password, and then you will have an extra link at the top of the page, which will say members on the far right. And when you click on that, you'll go to the home page of the members area, and you will have a bit of information at the top that's specific to you, how you've used the ORS before. And you'll have a section at the bottom, which is My Details, which is where you can change things like your password. You can also enter something about your recording interests and your experience, which can be useful to a country recorder because they can access that. In fact, we'll be able to access that better in the new ORS. And it might just help them understand what your level of experience is with a particular group if they don't know you. Now, we've got enter records and view records. So if you click enter records, you get to the standard entry page, which is up at the top of the options that pop up, and then you have some specific projects. Now, there aren't any projects on here at the moment that are specifically linked to butterflies, so I won't mention them particularly. So just clicking through to the standard data entry form, you first of all have to select your species group at the top right with the drop-down list, and you choose butterflies and moths, and you then start typing in the English or scientific name of the species you're looking for. If you're using this in Welsh, you can type it in the Welsh name or the scientific name. You then select from the list of options, and the most likely options will be near the top. There'll be some grayed out options for very rare species that you'd be unlikely to come across. So you click on the option you want there. The names are all standard ones. The scientific and English ones come from the Natural History Museum managed UK species inventory, so it's very much a standard dictionary. And the Welsh names are also standard ones from Cymdeithas Edward Llwyd. Now, you've put in your species name. The next bit of information is the location. So you type in your site name, and you can either type in your grid reference, or you can go directly to the online map to find the grid reference. Even if you've typed it in, it's worth clicking Find on Map to check it or refine it. But if you're going to the map to start with, you can search by place name or postcode, or just use the zooming in and out tools to find what you're looking for. So this facility has really helped people in sending records to us with accurate grid references, although people do still sometimes make mistakes. So it's always worth using that Find on Map bit to check. So the online mapping functionality will look a bit like this. You'll have Ordnance Survey maps, and you can switch to aerial photographs. You can zoom in further if you'd like to. It's really, really useful. And I would say that the 8-figure grid reference is usually what you want for butterfly records, but I don't know, Jan might have a slightly different idea, but I think that's probably about a good balance. It's usually only for something like a lichen record that someone is likely to put in a 10-meter resolution, where it's very, very specific site and it's not going to move. Further down the page, you then have abundance information, where you can enter a count or a qualifier. In that count box, you can actually put something in text if you want to, so saying something like many or something like that. It can be as vague as that. If you click on record type, you can choose from things like live sighting, so that may well be appropriate to put a record type in. And then you can also attach some evidence if possible, and this is really important if you can possibly put in a photograph, or if you've got more than one, you can zip them up and upload them. In the new ORS, you'll be able to put multiple files on without zipping them up. But examination of this evidence, it is really important actually, and sometimes it leads to a species name update, and it just enables the county recorder in many cases to verify the record. The other bits to fill in then on the right are the recorder. Now that will default to the name of the person entering the record, but if you're putting in someone else's record, you can delete that and put in their name. You can put in multiple recorders if you want by clicking on that little symbol to the right of the field with the plus there. And you can put notes to describe any distinguishing features if the species is unusual. So that's really helpful there. And of course the date. And then the confidence is generally mandatory. But if you're entering someone else's record, that may not be possible to set this. So let us know if that's a problem, because there are other forms that we sometimes set up for people if they're entering other people's records. Now, if you put a low confidence, this will ensure that it is checked by the county recorder, because not all records are checked, and I'll mention that in a moment. So you then click on the Submit Record button and you'll see the record pop up in the table at the bottom of the page. So you can check it there. You've got a few little options to the left for editing it, the little pencil symbol there, deleting it, the rubbish bin symbol, or indeed copying the record if you wanted to enter another one that was almost the same. It couldn't save time to copy the record and just change the one bit that's different. The padlock symbols are really important. You'll see them next to each field. And if you're entering a whole batch of records of the same species, for example, if you lock down that field, then that information will be kept every time you click Submit Record. And you might want to do the same for, the date and the recorder name, and just change the species name if you're entering a whole list from a particular site, something like that. Now, that's enter records in a nutshell. Once you've entered some records, you can go back to look at those records at any point under View Records. And just to give you an idea, this is just some sample data, which actually came in under a project called a Swift Recovery about swifts. But you'll see a list of different projects, and you either select all or click on what you particularly want to look at. Most of you will just have one or two options there. Then click View Records, and you'll get all the records here with scrollable pages down the bottom. You can always view more records per page if you want to. The default would be 10, but you can view up to 200 records on a page. You've got a few useful tools here. You can add a user comment if you need to say something like, oh, I realized that grid reference was incorrect. If you're no longer able to edit it yourself, you might want to add a user comment to alert us to make that change. And the quick filter allows you to say, oh, I'd like to see all records of that particular sighting date, for example, or species or recorder name, whatever. It just filters down. When you've got a lot of records, you'll find that kind of thing is very useful. There's also tools on the right-hand side of the View Records page where you can do a bit more advanced filtering if you want. And under Tools, you can map your records as well. You can also download them into Excel if you want to. You can either download everything or filter first and then download certain records. But the mapping is very, very useful in terms of visualizing where you've been, and maybe for a particular species where the distribution of records you've put in is. Now, the status of your record, you'll see this change potentially with time. So it's a little circle on the far right of the row. So records sometimes go in as unassessed, and you'll see the yellow light bulb pop up straight away, and that means that it's live in our database and it's not seen as a priority for checking. But quite a few of them, the light bulb will be white and the status will be white. And those are the records that the county recorder, like Jan, will look at, and then she will change the status to something like hopefully probably correct or known correct. If they change to unconfirmed or incorrect, it might be that the photograph or something has enabled her to tell that it's actually a different species. And in those cases, we contact people and let them know, and that's really helpful to know that it actually was something else. And we can change them at that point too. So the records that are prioritized for checking, there are various factors, and one of the main ones is the ID difficulty rating, and this is set by Butterfly Conservation as part of a more national system. But it means that certain species are seen as quite easy to ID, and we don't prioritize them for checking, but the ones that are a bit more difficult, they are all looked at. Then there's some geographic and temporal checks as well. So if the species had never been recorded in that particular 10 km square, it might be flagged up for checking, or if it was at the wrong time of year, that's quite a relevant one for butterflies. And then finally, your confidence level. As I said, if you say, oh, I'm not too sure about this, then it will be looked at as well. So that's about it in a nutshell. I'll come out of here and stop sharing, but you know, as Richard said, you can put any questions in the chat and we can come back to them at the end. Shall I pass over to you now, Jan?
Yeah, I just, if people want a break first, do they? No.
We okay to go on, everyone? Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Can everyone hear me all right? I don't seem to have the black screen underneath anymore. I don't know why. Oh.
If you just hover your mouse, Jan, on the bottom, your cursor, it'll appear.
No, I've got a white Zoom screen now.
Oh, okay. Now, when you share your screen, I think you do lose some of the controls. So what you can do is just go straight to slideshow view. So treat it like you're in Publisher or PowerPoint, sorry.
I don't know why it's gone. There we are.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so slideshow view.
There we go.
Is that all right? Did everyone see that? Okay.
Yep, good.
All right. Okay, so I've been a volunteer for Butterfly Conservation Wales for 20 years or more, but I've only recently become the county recorder for North East Wales, which, although it's called Flintshire and Denbighshire, it actually covers what's now Wrexham and a large part of Conwy as well. And that's all the details of, if you want to email me about any queries about butterflies, and my personal website, which has got lots of information about larval food plants and plants for butterflies and moths. And this is our local branch of Butterfly Conservation, northwalesbutterflies.org.uk. And but actually what people are using more now is Facebook. Facebook has been a godsend during the lockdown because we haven't been allowed to go out more than 5 miles from where we live to record. And I've been getting most of my records off Facebook in the last year and a half. So lots of people can share their photos on there very easily. And we can all comment about them and join in identification, which is not difficult in North Wales, luckily enough, because we have got very few species left compared with mainland Europe. UK butterflies have been dying out for hundreds of years, of course, and especially since the last war. There are some 55 breeding species of butterflies native to the British Isles today. Some books will tell you 60 species. It all depends whether they're written by southerners or not. Over half of these are now threatened, and 5 species actually became extinct in the 20th century, but one has been very successfully reintroduced. So these are species from the main ID charts that you will get in most of the books and the Field Studies Council charts. The red ones crossed out in red are ones which do not currently exist in North Wales, except 1 or 2 are beginning to appear. With global warming, they're moving north, so that's quite exciting, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But that's why, like Richard was saying, it's very useful to record what we used to think of as the common species and go on recording them year after year, because that gives us a picture of how butterflies are responding to climate change. They're very sensitive to climate change, and they can measure things. A lot of scientists are interested in them because they can measure how climate change is moving northwards. And something like at one conference I went to, they said for every half a degree of warming, the butterflies are moving 25 kilometers north. So they can actually measure it that accurately. If they have mountains nearby, they're moving up the mountains, but of course once they get to the top of the mountain they can't go any further, so they're just dying out. But interestingly, Chris Thomas, who is a butterfly scientist at York University, another conference I went to, was saying that the British Isles might have to become a nature reserve for lots of butterflies which currently live on mainland Europe, because they have to come north. So that would be quite exciting. Reasons for butterfly and other insect decline in the last 50 years. Well, I'm sure you know about this, but it's really to do with loss of habitat. And the habitat includes wildflowers, because all the butterflies have evolved to use just very, very few, in many cases just one particular native species for their larvae to feed on. So if you don't have the caterpillars, you see lots of articles about helping butterflies, and it's all about planting foreign species like buddleia to attract the adults. But if you don't feed the babies, you don't get the adults. It's fairly obvious. But we have lost 98% of our downland wildflower meadows, native meadows in Britain and in Wales since the war. So that was when they encouraged farmers to produce more food, because of course we were importing 2/3 of our food then, and we were getting blockaded by the German gunboats, and the farmers were helped to produce more food. And they didn't realize what a devastating effect this would have on the wildlife. There's also a lot more building since the war, and now we have to include climate change as well. So all these things are forcing butterflies off the land. And this is a sort of landscape you can see in places like East Anglia, where the hedges have been taken out to allow machinery to get in easier. Wet meadows have been drained, old fields reseeded with foreign species like Italian ryegrass, or monocultures like grain crops and food crops over huge areas without any of the old wildflowers still in the hedgerows. And of course, use of pesticides and herbicides and high nitrogen fertilizers mean that grasses dominate, and that these all push out the larval food plants. Often hedgerows are the last refuge of these larval food plants that used to be in the fields. And this is the lane just up from my house up to, from Whitford. I live near Holywell. And there's a village called Gorseth up the top of that hill. And this is the lane up to it in early May with red campion and greater celandine, bluebells, stitchwort. Later on there'll be bird's foot trefoil and hedge parsley and nettles and things. And this is all really important for butterfly larvae and for bees, incidentally, coming out of hibernation, which is all very well until the council mowers come along. And that's okay if they do this thing of just mowing in 1 metre from the edge of the road. If you've got a wide verge, you've still got lots of these wildflowers left. But quite often our banks, like this verge on the left, are steep, and they turn the mower on its side and scrape along the whole verge and destroy everything. You can see here they're even scraping bare soil, so that if there's any bees, most of our pollinators, solitary bees and bumblebees, nest in holes in the ground, and they would have been excavating holes to make nests, and here it's been scraped off, so a lot of them would be seriously discouraged. However, we've been campaigning for 20 years or more to the councils to not do this, because especially in May, when everything's feeding up before it flies in June. So we've been trying to say, you know, please just mow once a year and mow later. But they get as many letters from people saying, why haven't you tidied up our village, as they do from people saying, why have you destroyed our lovely wildflowers? So if you see this sort of thing happening around your way, do contact the council. It's the transportation department you need, not the biodiversity officer, who will agree with you, but the transportation officer is higher up the pecking order, and they make decisions about road safety, and they'll tell you that's what this is all about. But you can see it's not necessary in May. It's when the plants get much longer and flop over that it could be a problem, but then only at junctions. So yes, please mow at junctions, but don't mow all down the lanes. And we have been having some success, because at the top of that hill there's a pub where my husband and I often go for our birthday dinner. So we can just roll down the hill afterwards. We can walk up there and drink. And the last few years, our birthdays are in June and August. And when we've gone up there, it hasn't been cut. And I don't know if this is because they know where I live. And I've been doing this talk for many years now. But we do seem to be getting through. The trouble is that after a few years, the officials involved in deciding this change over, and then you get somebody new in who gets a letter from someone saying, we've got rats and it's all because you haven't mowed the verges. And off they go again, sending the contractors out to mow. It saves them a lot of money to only mow once a year, obviously. And it's difficult to say which time of year they should do it, because a lot of butterflies have 2 generations. But basically the end of June, I think, would be the best, because then you've got chance for the butterflies that have just pupated and flown to lay their eggs on any new growth coming through. And this is one of the really important larval food plants, the bird's foot trefoil. And the red clover is also very important for good nectar. And these are both important for bumblebees, because they have a higher protein content in their pollen than many other plants. And as you know, 1/3 of the food we eat depends on bee pollination. And now I'm going to talk about the species that we've got of butterflies in North Wales. So these are the families and the number of species in them that we have got. And I just want to change the screen, because I'm going to tell you about this ID chart that I have produced, especially for North Wales. Let's see how I do this now. I've got to go up to new share. I've forgotten now. Flip. Stop share.
Yep.
And then, but I've got to do share myself. How do I do that?
You're already doing it, Jan.
Am I? It just
Yeah,
says
you've got no
Cofnod
screen
Richard
now.
across mine.
No, but everyone else is probably.
Everybody
seeing
else can
Vanessa's
see me,
talking.
can they? Okay. So I'm going to show you how the chart is made of laminated cardboard. So you can take it out in the wet weather and keep it in your backpack, and it's not as heavy as a book. It's got the families in the groups separated by a purple dotted line. So these are the skippers down here. Then we've got the Vanessas, the common ones you see on the buddleia later on in the year, but also the first ones you see early in the year because they hibernate as adults, unlike most other butterflies. Then we've got the rare, special rare butterflies, the fritillaries, which are the only difficult ones to tell the difference between, apart from the blues. And then we've got the whites, which include the cabbage white and the small white, but also yellow butterflies like the brimstone and the clouded yellow, which isn't on here because it's not considered a resident species, but we sometimes get those migrating over from the continent. And along the bottom, we've got all the browns, which are quite a lot, and most of them are quite common, but some of them are very rare, and they mostly feed on grasses, old-fashioned grasses. And that's why it's important not to have meadows that have been reseeded, not just because of wild flowers, but because of the wild grasses as well. And then on the back, we've got the blues and coppers and hair streaks, which are a more complicated family. And I'll go into them family by family and give you the short diagnostics to look at. Because a lot of people say, oh, but they fly away so quickly and I didn't get a good look at it. But actually, because we've got relatively few different species in North Wales, there are diagnostics to look for even when they're moving that can help you to identify them. Then on the back, I've listed all the diagnostics and the larval food plants by species. And then we've got a flight table at the end, which tells you the months when they are flying as adults. I think a lot of people don't realize that not all butterflies fly all summer. Most of them only fly for about 3 weeks and then at different times of year. So that's an aid in identifying them. For example, if you see a blue butterfly in April, it's more likely to be a holly blue than anything else. We only get holly blue and common blue in North Wales, except in some very special locations. And the common blue doesn't normally start flying till the beginning of June. I say normally, always used to be, but this year it's been much earlier because we had that hot May. So with climate change, sometimes they can vary. But generally the flight table will help you see which butterflies should be around now or not when you see them. So this is very handy, and I'm going to go through them family by family, and you can get this chart from me at a special discounted rate for educational purposes on my website, which is sevenwells.co.uk. But we can send round a list of all these links later on. Okay, so now then, share screen again, and it brings me back to there. I hope this is going to be the whole presentation. Blah de blah de blah. Okay, so yeah, there's the website, sevenwells.co.uk, and this is the chart that you can get from the FSC. But of course, it's got lots of butterflies on it, like right at the top here, it's got white admiral and purple emperor. Well, we just don't get those in Wales, so you don't have to worry about those. It's easier when you're starting to have just the Welsh species. So that's what I've done on this one. So let's start with the Vanessas. And these are, like I said, the still fairly common ones that you see early in the year because they are some of the only ones that hibernate as adults. So they come out in March as soon as it warms up a bit, sometimes even in February. Whether they survive when they come out when it's cold and then it warms up and it gets cold again, I don't know, but I suspect they may not do. So you'll see these early spring. They've pretty much died off now, all the adults. They've mated and laid their eggs, and the caterpillars are feeding up, and they will be emerging as adults in the next few weeks in July, really. So that's why you see them on the buddleia in August, September, October. The red admiral didn't used to be considered a native species, nor did the painted lady, because they don't overwinter here. But the red admiral is starting to do that now with climate change, especially in the south of the country. So you see this all year round, really. It's one of the strange butterflies that seems to be able to fly in much colder temperatures than others. And I'm not sure why, because it's got very dark wings. Whereas the ones that normally do like the cabbage whites, they've got white wings that reflects the light onto the body. Obviously, these are cold-blooded creatures. They don't create their own heat like we do, like mammals do. So they depend entirely on the sun to warm them up. And that's why they fly generally only in sunny weather, but also they can warm themselves by basking like this on a white stone or indeed on tarmac. This is why brownfield sites are really important for butterflies now. They can regulate their temperature by finding warmer areas. And the red admiral has got, like I say, a black background, but it's got these very distinct red stripes right down the top of the wing and across the bottom. And it's got these white, what I like to think of as epaulets that the admiral might wear. Then we've got the peacock, which is our only one that has these circular eyes on them. So that's the diagnostic to look for, is just the circles. The small tortoiseshell used to be one of our most common butterflies. It's been attacked by a particular parasite in recent years, so the numbers have dropped. And this reinforces what Richard was saying. It's always important to record what you think of as common species, because sometimes they can change, and then it's very useful or important for the scientists to know about why this is happening. But the numbers seem to be climbing up again with small tortoiseshell now. But a lot of butterflies have a cycle of some good years and then some bad years of population. So again, it's important to track this. You can tell the small tortoiseshell by this sort of tortoiseshell pattern. That's why it's called that. On the leading edge of the wing, you've got black and white or cream coloured stripes along the edge. So that's the thing to look for. And it's orange all the rest of the wing. It could be confused with the comma if you see it moving. However, the comma is our only butterfly with this very distinctly scalloped edge. So look for whether it has a scalloped edge or not, and then that'll tell you immediately whether it's a comma or something else. And the painted lady only comes over from the Atlas Mountains in North Africa later in the year, generally. If it's early, it's overwintered in some barn somewhere, luckily, but generally it's only a late migrant. But we do get huge numbers of them sometimes, because they can fly huge distances if the weather's very good in Europe. They'll fly right up through Europe and come in large numbers, like the monarchs in America. But this is very rare. Very few butterflies can fly that distance. Most of our butterflies can only fly 1 or 2 miles at most. So this is why they're dying out if they can't find the right habitat. And the habitats they need, well, the Vanessas, these are the ones, as we know, that we see in gardens. And there's lots of lovely cultivated flowers that they go for, as well as wildflowers. And I've written a book on gardening for butterflies and bees, which you can also get from my website, which will tell you all these flowers and how to grow them and lots more information besides, also how to identify. And so you find them in fields, gardens, parks, and these are the ones which feed on stinging nettle. People tell you if you want to help butterflies, you have to plant stinging nettle. There's only 4 species that feed on stinging nettle, and there's still lots of stinging nettles in the countryside, especially due to nitrogen deposition from our cars and industries in the last 200 years. So you don't have to worry about growing nettles if you've got a small garden. There are other larval food plants which are more important. And now we're on to the family of skippers. They get that name because they have a sort of skipping flight when you see them. And the 2 common ones are the large skipper and the small skipper. And they are distinctive in they hold their top wings at a sort of 45-degree angle, a bit like Dakota, is it? Aeroplane. So that's something to look for when they're settled. But when you see them flying, they're just orangey brown. There is a size difference, and they do fly at different times of year, but so you don't necessarily see them together. The large skipper comes out first. I've just seen my first one a couple of days ago. Down near the coast, you'll see them a bit earlier. So they're June emerging, really. And the large skipper has larger blotches of orange and brown on the wing. The small skipper starts coming out at the end of June, and it's all orange on the top wing. So if you see an all orange butterfly, a bit furry like a moth, quite small, about the size. These are the outline shapes on these slides that are quite useful to help you get the settled wing orientation. So that's the 2 you might see in the garden. These 2 skippers at the bottom are 2 of our rare species, and they have taken to brownfield sites. As I say, it's 14% of our red data book species are now on brownfield sites. And so when people say, oh, let's build on the brownfield sites and not on the green belt, I'm afraid it should be the other way around, because the green belt is a green desert now, with all the high nitrogen fertilizer and dark green monoculture grass, which is cold, in fact, for butterflies in our climate. That is not where our wildlife is living anymore. They've migrated to the brownfield sites where they can still find some of the wild plants they need for their egg laying, and where there's lots of different coloured surfaces and hard surfaces that they can bask on to warm up. And that's why the grizzled skipper, the best site was on Wrexham Industrial Estate, where they have plonked the prison on top. In spite of our protestations, the MOD wants to do something. No protection of any rare species counts for anything, it appears. They are trying to do some kinds of mitigation measures on Wrexham Industrial Estate now to try and introduce the grizzled skipper on other parts of it, but this is very difficult to do. This is why rare species are rare, because they have very specific needs and it's very difficult to recreate them. The dingy skipper is not as rare as the grizzled skipper, but it still tends to be on old quarries, sandy areas near the coast. So that's quite a interesting one to look out for if you're on walks in those kind of places. And the larval food plants for the large skipper and the small skipper are wild grasses, whereas the grizzled skipper needs barren strawberry or tormentil, and the dingy skipper needs our old friend mentioned before, the bird's foot trefoil. Here's a picture of barren strawberry in flower. You can see it looks very much like a real strawberry, but it doesn't have strawberry fruits. That's why the old name for it is barren strawberry. The flowers are very similar to strawberry flowers, except that they've got a gap between the petals like that, and the end of the leaf, instead of being pointed as it is in the wild strawberry, have a truncated point at the end like that. So that's how you tell them apart when they're not actually fruiting, or indeed when they're not flowering. And this is Tormentil. Again, you can see it's a potentilla. It's got these 4 petals with the gap between them. And that's a creeping plant that you see in the wild sometimes, especially if you stop at the side of a motorway in those laybys. I've seen it there quite a bit. It likes scrambling over the gravel that's laid down there. Now we're on to the whites family. Now these you'll be familiar with, but the funny thing is, because these cabbage whites, so-called, the large white and the small white, are very common, they're actually quite difficult to tell apart. They are, there is a size difference, but again, you not necessarily see them flying together. So what I tell people to look for is on the large white, look for the black tip on the top wing coming right down the side of the top wing. Whereas on the small white, you've just got a black tip at the top there. There is another white butterfly called the orange tip, which looks very similar to the small white when it's the male, because it doesn't have the orange tips on it. Or the female, sorry, but it does have this mottled green and white pattern underneath, which is quite different from the so-called cabbage whites, which just have a pale yellow underwing. So it's very useful to, if you're not sure about butterflies, to follow them until they settle and get a good look at the underside. That's very often where the diagnostics are for the more confusing or the rarer species. The orange tip male has orange points on it, which is very distinctive, but the female doesn't. So that's when you might get confused with them. And I think a lot of records that we receive as small white were actually orange tips or green veined white, which are more common. So this is why it's really useful to have a photograph, even of what you think might be a common species. If you can get a photograph of the underside, that really helps me and the other recorders to verify a species and get a better picture of which ones are scarcer. Now we've got these 2 scarce and beautiful yellow butterflies. This is a resident, the brimstone. It's our only one with points like this on the top and bottom wing. And it can look quite pale greenish underneath, especially the female. But it's a lovely butter yellow on top. And some people say that's where we get the word butterfly from, because it was the butter-coloured fly that people would see early in the spring, because this is another one that hibernates as an adult, often in dead ivy or dead leaves, or in a shed. But it's quite scarce in North Wales, and we think it's simply because its larval food plant, which is buckthorn, was not planted as a hedging plant as it was in South Wales and southern England and Cheshire. So if I do any community gardens or school gardens, I always plant in a buckthorn just to help draw the brimstone across from England, because we should have it. And we sometimes get this clouded yellow, which, as you can see, when you see the 2 together, it's quite a different colour yellow. It's a more golden yellow, and also it's got more spots, dark spots on the underwing. But that's fairly scarce, and it comes over late in the year, like the painted lady. The green veined white is obviously because of the green veins. You can see very clearly here on the underside. But again, if you see the top of it, it looks very similar to a small white. So you need to see the underside. And these are the sorts of plants that the whites love. They're all cabbage family, you see. And it's not just our cabbages, our cultivated cabbages that they eat. They also eat wild cabbages, and that's how they started off, of course. Things like Jack by the hedge or garlic mustard. They'll feed on the seed pods. I've got loads of this in my garden now, and I'm saving all the seed heads and looking carefully at the seed heads, because the caterpillar looks exactly like them, very well camouflaged on the long seed pods. and they're feeding up now, so I won't cut or pull those up until another month or two, because then they will be able to go into hibernation and fly again next year. But you won't see them all the rest of the year because they will hibernate right through the summer. Dame's violet is a wildflower that they love to nectar on, and so is honesty, which is not truly a native wildflower, but there is quite a lot of it about in gardens. And you can see they all have the 4 petals, which makes it cabbage family, or crucifer, cross-form flowers. If you look at these little individual tiny flowers on the garlic mustard, they also just have 4 petals. Now we're into the browns. And like I said, there's quite a lot of these. These 2 are very common. You will know the meadow brown and the gatekeeper, I'm sure. Can be confused, actually. The meadow brown flies earlier. It's not flying yet in my meadow, but it will be soon. Middle to end of June, it appears. And it's got less orange on its wings. The female will have an orange patch at the top. They sometimes in the books, they tell you to count the number of white dots in this black eye to tell the difference between the meadow brown and the gatekeeper. But I find that very tricky to do if they're moving. What I look for is if there's orange on the underwing, because it's only the gatekeeper that has the orange here on the lower wing, and that gives it these broad brown borders all the way around, and you can see that when it's flying. Whereas the meadow brown is just kind of a dull brown all over usually. And they need to feed on our wild native grasses, but they're still very common, and they feed on road verges and old neglected areas quite a lot. Now these other 2 are quite scarce now. The wall brown used to be more common, but it's getting very scarce now. It's another one that's migrated to brownfield sites and to sand dunes near the sea. It can look a bit like a fritillary on the top, but if you get to see the underside, you can see it's got this greyish colouring, and it's got these distinctive spots all the way around. Now you might I'll show you the ringlet on the next page, which also has these round circles on the underwing, but it's a different brownish colour. The wall brown is the only one with this orange on the top. And then we've got the grayling, which you probably know there's a fish called a grayling as well. And the grayling butterfly has this kind of fish scaly appearance on its lower underwing. No spots, you see, on the underwing, just this greyish scaly pattern. And they are very scarce now and mostly confined to coastal areas. So that's quite important to look for those if you're walking along the promenades. And here are the other browns. All of these are fairly common now, apart from the large heath. This large heath is very scarce because its larvae have to feed on cotton grass, on boggy areas. So you only find it on boggy areas. And it's a kind of moth-like, furry, greyish underside and brown top wing. But the small heath is a more, oh dear, I've forgotten the word. Getting old now. What's the word? There's a word for if they eat more plants. Anyway, they're more Catholic in their eating habits, so it's more common. And this is, I've started seeing in gardens a lot more and on verges. Again, it's got a greyish furry appearance, but it's on the top, it's very orangey brown with just a tiny little black dot at the top point there. And it's smaller than the other browns. The ringlet east of the Conwy Valley doesn't seem to be that common, but it's getting more common. I'm getting more reports of that. And that's a chocolatey brown, but the underside is the most distinctive thing, with these black rings, but with a white ring around the outside as well. It's the only butterfly that has that. Some people might confuse it with the speckled wood, which is down the bottom right here, and much more common. This is the commonest of all the brown ones now. Didn't used to be. It's spreading up the country, again maybe because of nitrogen deposition and its larval food plant. And it's got very distinct white spots all over the top, not just underneath like the others. So you see that in gardens, and it's called a wood because it likes dappled shade in woodland areas. So you find it in woodland gardens. This is the flight table that's on the chart, just to show you that the difference in the times when the adults are flying, and it can be variable depending on the weather of the season. So you see here we've got peacock, April, May, and it comes out of hibernation, and then it dies, and it has a second generation from the eggs that the first generation laid in August when it's on the buddleia, and so on and so forth. So this helps you to identify the butterflies, and this is written by the previous recorder for North Wales, Rob Whitehead, who sadly died in 2006. And luckily I got him to draw this up for me for North Wales, because although you can get this information in all the books seem to be written by Southerners, and their springs and autumns are at different times of year. I mean, they can vary by 2 to 4 weeks when our spring starts up here compared with Surrey. So if you've got a book written by someone who lives in the south, they will tell you that these butterflies start appearing much earlier than they do up here. So that's another important thing to help you identify what you're seeing or what you're likely to see. Now we're on to hair streaks. We're nearly finished now. These are beautiful little butterflies which have a little tail at the end of the wing. You can see on this one at the bottom here, a little tail, but that often gets pecked off by birds. In fact, that's probably the purpose of it. It's like the eyes on the peacock butterfly, is to trick predators, which are usually birds, into thinking that that's the moving part, or that's the main part of the animal, and they peck at that, but it doesn't damage the butterfly because its only vital parts are in the body in the middle. The wings are like our hair or like our fingernails. They're made of chitin, so they don't hurt, and they don't have bloods coursing through them. So that's okay if they can. You probably sometimes see a butterfly flying with really tattered wings. Well, they can still do that because it's the body which is the important part. The green hair streak is our only green butterfly of any kind, so that's very distinctive, and it's just on the underside. You get this really iridescent green. It's just a plain brown on the top, but luckily when it lands it clamps its wings together like a lot of butterflies, so you get a good look at the underside. The purple hair streak looks pretty boring on the underside. It can look like silver paper sometimes, kind of greyish, but when it opens its wings it's got beautiful purple markings. But this is how you will see it normally, is the underside up on the top of oak trees, and it doesn't. A lot of the hair streaks actually get their sugar hit not from nectar from flowers, but from the honeydew left by aphids on trees. So they will stay in the tops of trees. They lay their eggs in trees. Well, the purple hair streak and the white letter hair streak do. The purple hair streak lays its eggs on oak, and the white letter hair streak lays its eggs on elm, which is why it's become quite rare now since Dutch elm disease. The green hair streak lives on more downland moor areas, and it can live in 2 different habitats. So it can feed on birdsfoot trefoil on mountain areas like Mynydd Marion, or it can feed on heathers in boggy areas like Clocainol forest. So looking for these hair streaks, to look in the tops of trees. Sometimes they come down to flowers if you're lucky. Habitats, bilberry on heathlands and birdsfoot trefoil and rock rose on limestone grasslands. But these are the plants that you might confuse with elm, because you think that all the old English elm has died out, but it hasn't. It's coming back. Look, I've got some in my fields. It's coming back from the roots. It's one of these trees that suckers underground, and the old roots are suckering up now. And these, they say, the beetle that carries the fungus of the Dutch elm disease likes this chunky sort of bark that the old English elm has as it gets older. So that's why the beetle will find this woody, corky bark later in its life, and the tree will still get the disease when it's about 20 years old, but it still grows until then. So we've still got the species associated with it. There's several species, different kinds of insects, which depend on elm. So this is important. They've also been surviving on wych elm, which has a much smoother bark. I don't know if you can see here, it's just a very smooth, shiny bark. So the beetle doesn't go for that. The thing about all elm is that it has an asymmetric leaf. You see here, the leaf comes further down the petiole, the leaf stalk, on one side than on the other. And it has a little point. And that's characteristic of all elms. If you could see these elm leaves close up, difficult to find one, but if you look closely, the one side will come further down the stalk than the other. And you might mistake them for hazel. This is hazel, of course, still very common in our hedgerows, but these are much more symmetrical, round leaves, and they join the leaf stalk at the same point, so you don't confuse them so much. Now we're on to the blues. As I mentioned before, if you live in North Wales, you will generally only ever see two blues. That's the holly blue, which has two generations, so in the early spring and the autumn, and as its name suggests, feeds on holly. It has to lay its eggs on holly in the autumn, and they overwinter as eggs right through the year, and then it lays its eggs on ivy for the later generation. So having old-fashioned wild ivy and holly in your garden or hedges is essential for these holly blues. Where are they? This is common blues here. Here's the holly blue. Beautiful butterfly, and that has a relationship with a wasp which lays eggs into its body and decimates the population every few years, and then it builds up again when the parasite dies. All these things have parasites, all insects have. You know, the old Latin proverb we had to learn at school, all bugs, little bugs have, sorry, big bugs have little bugs upon their backs to bite them. Little bugs have littler bugs, and so ad infinitum. They're always something eating something else. So, but sometimes some butterflies are more affected than others, and the holly blue is one that disappears almost some years and then comes back again. Once it's died out a lot, the parasite also dies out with it. So then the host is able to come back for the next couple of years until the parasite builds up again. The other one you will see in gardens, if you're lucky, is the common blue, which has to have bird's foot trefoil for its larvae to eat. So if you grow that in the garden, you may get them in the garden. And the female has orange spots around the edge, which can confuse it with a brown Argus, which I'll show you in a minute. That's the only difficult one. But otherwise, the blues are pretty easy to tell apart because they have orange on the underside as well. I'll show you that in the next slide. But in North Wales, we also have this very special silver-studded blue, which they get in the rest of the country like this on heathland areas, feeding on heather. But our special great orme race, as you probably know, the great orme has a lot of endemic species which don't occur anywhere else in the world, actually, because it was isolated during the Ice Age. And the Carnensis race of the silver-studded blue has blue females, whereas the silver-studded blue that lives on the heath has brown, all brown females. So, and the great orme silver-studded blues are out right now. If you want to go and see them, go to the West Shore and park along the prom there, up the road that goes around the sort of goes all the way around the orme. At the very beginning of it, there's a castellated sort of little gatehouse, and there's a footpath sign there. And if you walk along the cliff from there, you will see these all over the ground now. They're doing very well there. They never fly more than 30 meters from where they emerge, so they don't spread to anywhere else unless people have taken them somewhere else, which they have done in this case, to the Llandulus Valley and to Mynydd Marion and to Graig Fawr. So there are some populations there, but they're actually quite stable where they are, but they are very, very rare. You don't find them anywhere else in the world. Also in the blue family are these butterflies which don't have any blue on them at all. Surprisingly, this is called the brown argos, which isn't that uncommon, and it feeds on rock rose, and it's all brown on top but with these orange luneals all round the side, and the small copper is bright orange copper butterfly, a little one with these square black or dark brown cells on it. And here are the undersides. Now this is where it becomes really important to see the undersides, because these are very similar. But think yourself lucky, because I went on a trip to Greece once, the Chelmos Mountains on the Peloponnese in Greece has got fantastic butterflies. And it's got about 30 different species of blues, and they're all very similar to this, and you really have to net them to tell the difference and get the book out and sit down and try and work through all the minute differences. But we've only got the silver-studded blue, the common blue, and the holly blue. Now, as you can see, the holly blue's got no orange on it whatsoever, so that's the definite diagnostic. The common blue has these orange chevrons or luneals, as they're called, along the edge, and so does the silver-studded blue. But the silver-studded blue often has a silver spot or silver stud, hence its name, on the third cell, and sometimes the other lower cells up from the bottom of the wing, but not always. So another diagnostic to look for is the pattern of spots, the black spots underneath. And on the common blue, it's got a rough, you know, if you join the dots, you could make a rough circle with no black dots in the middle. Whereas the silver-studded blue has a more random pattern of black dots. And the silver-studded blue heathland race also has the orange, makes more of like a straight band right along the edge. Here you can see the silver studs again. And there's the common blue again to compare it with. And brown argos can be confused with the female common blue, but the pattern on the underwing is more like a figure of 8, 2 dots, 2 black dots on the underside, that as you can see in the common blue doesn't have that pattern. So that's the thing to look for. But also the brown argos has no blue on its body at all, whereas you see the common blue does tend to have a kind of some bluish near the body and that body end of the wing and on its actual body. So that's what to look for on that one. Now the small blue is on here. This is actually extinct as far as we know in North Wales. Hasn't been recorded in living memory, but it does exist in South Wales and in Mid Wales. So it could be here. The caterpillar has to feed on kidney vetch. And that still grows on our limestone outcrops here. So, and you can grow it in the garden, and it could be on brownfield sites. So, you know, just to keep a lookout for this. It's very similar to the holly blue in being pale blue with no orange at all on the underside, but you can see it's got a more regular pattern of black dots. On the top, it's just brown, brownish blue. But that's another thing that the county recorders are for. If you think you've found a site with something scarce like that, I will come out and check it because I will be very excited. So you can telephone me and let me know, and I'll try and come out and check it for you and for the records. This is a lovely photo. I don't think it was taken by me. I can't remember who it was now. Might have been the chairman of Butterfly Conservation Local Branch, who rejoices in the wonderful name of Ilya Vukomanovic, but he's quite English. His parents weren't, obviously. And he is a lovely chap, and he takes fantastic photographs of the orm. This is rock rose. You see the limestone outcrop here? The yellow flowers are rock rose, and that's what the great orm race of the silver-studded blue has to lay its eggs on for the first stage of its life. Then it does something extraordinary, like some other blue species. It attracts a particular species of ant by putting out a pheromone, which makes the ants think that it's escaped one of their own grubs. And it takes the silver-studded blue caterpillar down into its nest, doesn't hurt it, and it looks after it. In fact, it feeds it sugar solution. And then the caterpillar pupates inside the ant's nest, where it's quite protected from predators, and flies out as an adult, sometimes after several years, because it can wait until the conditions are right. So this would be a defense against when we had permafrost still in this area, of course. So, you know, at the end of the Ice Age. So there are some fantastic relationships. I don't know if I've got, here we are, I've got a picture, there we are. There's a close-up of the rock rose, the native rock rose. You get a lot of hybridized ones of these for sale in garden centres. I'm not sure if the silver-studded blue could feed on this as well. This is the wild kind. And here are some of the particular species of ant that the silver-studded blue caterpillar has a relationship with. Checking it out because it can sense the pheromone. And here they are taking a pupa, or moving a pupa in the nest or down into the nest. Wonderful. You see these incredible things on David Attenborough and you think, oh, you know, exotic places, but these things are on our doorstep as well. Now, if you haven't recorded before, Butterfly Conservation does a well-known public engagement exercise called the Big Butterfly Count at the end of July and beginning of August. The dates change a little from year to year. This year it's going to be the 16th of July to the 8th of August. We have to cover, we found that it's no good just having 1 week because, as you well know, in North Wales it can rain for a whole week in July and August quite happily. So we have to spread it over about 3 weeks in the hope that you'll get a sunny day. And you just go to this website, bigbutterflycount.org. You can print off the ID chart for this year. They usually have a lot of the common species, but 1 or 2 special ones that we're looking out for. And you just have to sit in your garden or when you go on a walk for 15 minutes and tick off which ones you see. And then you can enter the results on the website again. This is a great thing to do with children in the summer holidays. And it's a fun thing. You can do it more than once, any number of times on different days and different places, as long as you put that information into the website. Now I'll just say a few words about our rare species. These are the wonderful fritillaries. Now I was a gardener for a long time before I was interested in butterflies, so I was intrigued to find out that there's a bunch of butterflies called fritillaries, because of course we have fritillary flowers as well. And apparently the name comes from the Latin for a checkerboard or a dice box with a checkered pattern on it. So as you can see, they all have a orangey background, and they have these square black patterns a bit offset, so that they look a bit like a chessboard. We have the only reserve for butterfly conservation in North Wales is primarily because of this very rare pearl bordered fritillary, this one in the top left hand corner, and it has a cousin called the small pearl bordered fritillary, which is extremely similar. And these are two which you have to see the underside to be able to really tell the difference. But you won't see the pearl bordered fritillary except in a couple of very special places. The reserve we've got is called Aoth Rocks, and it's near Ruthin. And I can take you up there on a walk sometime if you're interested. In fact, I haven't been up this year, again because of lockdown and because I've got people on Facebook telling me when they're seeing them up there. It's been a very strange year this year for butterflies because of that very warm April, or was it May? Very warm April, wasn't it? I think a lot of butterflies came out really much earlier than they usually do. So, but they've spread, instead of being all bunched in to the end of May, these fritillaries have been spread across the whole of May in lower numbers. So this is an important thing why we have to take records every year in the same places, so that we can see, understand these different trends and try and conserve them. These butterflies don't fly more than a mile, if that, from where they emerge. So if they haven't got similar habitat nearby, they simply die out. Small pearl bordered is much more common now. It's adapted to feeding on marsh violets. All the fritillaries, apart from the marsh fritillary, feed on wild violets, the violet flowers and the leaves. And the pearl bordered fritillary comes out from hibernation in late March and feeds up in quite cold weather, basking on bracken. It's often in bracken areas. Underneath the bracken, lots of violets grow. And the small pearl bordered comes out later in June and lays its eggs in wetter areas of marsh violets very often. But it also can share a habitat with the pearl bordered. And as it looks so similar, you have to look at the underside, which I will show you in a minute. Then we've got the dark green fritillary, which lives in similar areas. It's a faster flyer. It flies quite high up, and it's sort of much more reddish orange. And when you see the underside, which I'll show you in a minute, it has green on it, which is where it gets its name. And then the silver washed fritillary is fairly scarce. It's our largest wild butterfly. It's about the size of your hand, the palm of your hand, and it's quite a strong flyer. You can hear it coming, and it has these slightly different long streaky markings, but I'll show you the underside is different as well from all the other fritillaries, but you would know it's simply from its size. It's our biggest butterfly, and it lives in more dappled shade, more sort of woodland areas. But like I said, it can fly some distance. And our rarest one of all, this is our red data species, the marsh fritillary. And the only butterfly conservation reserve in South Wales is mainly for this species. It still lives in what they call rose pasture in Welsh. It's very boggy, wet pasture, and it feeds on devil's bit scabious. So here's the underside. To tell the difference between the pearl bordered and the small pearl bordered, you look for the white cells in the middle of the wing. You can see why they're called pearl bordered now, because they have these lovely white pearly cells around the edge of the wing. Both of them have this, but they also have white cells in the middle. So the pearl bordered just has one white cell in the middle, whereas the small pearl bordered has several whiter cells in the middle. The small pearl bordered also has a bigger black dot in the cell near the body, whereas the pearl bordered has a smaller black dot. These are the diagnostics for those two species. I'm afraid you have to look quite closely for those. And you have to get a good photograph to tell the difference as well. The silver washed has quite a different pattern on the underside. You can see it's all streaky, silvery washed, in fact. So that's quite distinctive. And the dark green fritillary has more round pearly spots, but it has this definite sort of darkish green all over the underwing. So that's quite distinctive if you can catch it when it's settled. And this is what they feed on, the dog violet, not the ordinary, the Viola odorata that you get in gardens, the scented one. Excuse me. Tickle in my throat. The dog violet, you tell by looking at the spur at the back of the flower. It has this very pale coloured, almost white spur. If you look at other violets, you'll find they all have a dark violet spur, very similar colour to the petals. The dog violet also has a pointed leaf, whereas the marsh violet tends to have a rounded leaf. And just about butterfly conservation, the work that we've done, we work closely with local councils and the Wildlife Trust to save habitats. This is when we were clearing the scrub up on Aoth Rocks in the 2000s, from 2000 to 2006, when we first acquired the reserve, and had to clear a lot of the scrub to expose the violets again. And then, wonder of wonders, you can see the results. This is when we started clearing the scrub, and this is the blue line shows the population of pearl border fritillary on the reserve, and the pink line shows the population of the adjacent farmers' land where the scrub was not cleared. And you can see immediately the population jumped up in the following years, and it's been around this just under 100 individuals nearly every year since then. Except this year, where the maximum number seems to have been 20 at one time. But like I say, it appeared much, much earlier, so maybe that's why. But we would love to get hold of this farmer's land and do the same on there, but he won't let us have it yet. So just shows you the success you can have if you get the conservation right. Now we're on to the bit that Cofnod's interested in. The necessity of recording, vital for conservation because it identifies species in decline, assesses the impact of environmental practices and policies. This is how we influence what the county council, what the government decides to do with road building. In the paper this morning, did you see the Welsh government have now put all their road building plans on hold to fit in with their carbon neutral ambitions, which is quite interesting. Whether they will reawaken these policies again, especially if the Conservatives take over, I don't know. But anyway, people take notice, but you have to take good records, and you have to have scientific records to base an argument on if you are trying to stop them building or damaging a natural environment. So this is why, from my point of view anyway, this is what is so important about keeping good records and getting lots of records. It helps with research, including climate change, which I've mentioned already. It also indicates the fortunes of other wildlife because, of course, what the insects are doing affects what the birds are doing. If you're more interested in birds than you are in butterflies and moths, you might be interested in the fact that blue tits have to feed their chicks hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars. They feed them on that. A lot of the seed-eating birds actually start off feeding their chicks on caterpillars because it's much higher protein, and they want to get them out of the nest and independent as quick as possible. So the first few weeks of their life, even though they're only going to eat seeds the rest of their lives, they have to have insect food. And of course, caterpillars are much more juicy and much more protein rich than a fly or something that's all skeleton. So important for other wildlife and for developing government policies, as I already mentioned. This is a casual recording sheet for the butterflies in North Wales. I'm sorry, it's not readable. It's just to remind me to tell you that I have got these. They used to be on the branch website when I was running it, but they've slimmed it down now. I don't know if it's still there, but I have these online. I can send you these online, and you can keep these on the kitchen notice board or in the glove compartment of the car, so that whenever you go out, you can just tick off which species you see. And like Richard said, there are 4 W's. The where is absolutely essential. So you want the site locality name. You can look up the grid reference when you get back if you don't have the map with you, but you need to put the grid reference in there if you know how to take a grid reference. I know a lot of people don't. So that's when the phone app comes in useful, because it does it by the satellite and you don't have to bother about that. You need to put in the habitat type. This is why I've been telling you a lot about the plants they need, because this will tell people whether it's a good habitat or not and how it can be protected. The day and the month, so the date, you put the year up at the top, and your name and your address and telephone number, so the recorder can check up with you when you saw these and how you identified them if we need to. And then it's got all the only species that you will see in Wales all down here, so that you tick in or put in how many you've seen. But like we mentioned, Aisling mentioned this before as well, there is now a phone app, and most people carry around a mobile phone with them now. And this is a wonderful way of making it so much easier for everybody. You can find it on, here's the website. You can find it on the first page of the Cofnod website. It's called the LERC, so I can't remember what that stands for, Local Environmental Recording something or other. But you'll see it on there as a picture of a phone, and you can download it onto your phone. And it's not just for butterflies. You see, this example shows all the lovely wildflowers, or even lichens and mosses, and everything is on here, beetles and hoverflies. And so you can take a photo with your phone, and that helps the recorder know if you've got the record right. If you don't, even if you don't know what it is, you can take a photo and send it in, and then somebody will contact you to tell you what you've seen. And as I say, it will contact the satellite above and put the grid reference in where you're standing when you take the photo, and send it direct to Cofnod or to iRecord, depending where you are. So that is a marvelous new help. And Aisling's saying there's a new version that's coming out that's going to be even better. So have a look at that, get it on your phone. Now, there are advanced recording methods. If you get interested in this, you can do what's called a timed count or a transect. This is a more scientific way of doing a fixed route across an area where a rare species is known to live, and you look to the left and right and in front of you for 2.5 meters, and you just record what you see in that area. Personally, if I see a rare species slightly outside that area, I will record it. I mean, there's not that many butterflies left anymore. That this was constructed in the 1950s when there were still clouds of butterflies around. So it also, I don't really rate it that much, because a lot of butterflies have what we call metapopulation. That means they breed in different patches of a similar area in different years, and this is particularly true of the fritillaries. It's not true of the silver-studded blue on the great orm, obviously, because they can't move very fast, so a transect is perfect for them. But for pearl border fritillary, you want to do something more like a timed count, which is doing a zigzag route across the whole area and count how many you see in 30 minutes. And that gives you a better measure of how many butterflies are actually on the wing at that time. And you only have to do that 1 to 4 times a year. So May, June, July and August will cover all the species in North Wales. Whereas with the transect, you have to do it weekly from April to October, which doesn't sound like much until you live in North Wales and the only dry day that you've had during the week was when you had a dentist appointment. I mean, it really can be quite difficult to get a hot sunny day in every week in our part of the world, or it used to be. Maybe with climate change, we've had a marvellous June, haven't we? It's been good for butterflies this year, I think. So those are the 2 scientific methods, which if you are interested in doing, please do get in touch with me and I can take you out on a training walk, if you like, and show you how to do it. Casual recording is just like with the ID chart I showed you before, the yellow ID chart, just in your garden or on walks, as long as you've got the date, the location, what species you think it was, and if at all possible with a photo. And as Mr. Board mentioned, it is crucial to go when the weather is good, because butterflies will only fly when it's above 13 degrees if they're white, only above 17 degrees if they're fritillaries. So, you know, you have to have quite good sunny hot weather to see them. There we are. So I've got this on the next page. Above 13 degrees, absolute minimum, but preferably above 17 degrees centigrade. And if you've been watching the forecast in the last few days, although we've had some very hot days, it's actually often not got above 15 degrees. So, you know, it's quite interesting. It's useful to have a little portable thermometer attached to your backpack when you go out recording. And full sun, as I said, or partly sunny and no rain, except for the silver-studded blue, which is extraordinary. I've seen that out in the rain, but that's unusual. And little or no wind, because of course they've got big wings, so they get buffeted around if there's a lot of wind. Timed count, counting the number of species in 30 minutes. Do a zigzag route across the whole area. Enter the species on your recording form. This is a rather old slide actually, and send to your county recorder. You can find who your local county recorder is on the national website, which is butterfly-conservation.org. But you can also send it direct into Cofnod, of course, which is what a lot of people seem to be doing now. And transect, I've already described how to do that. Do fill in, you know, sometimes when you start off from home in this area, by the time you get to the area you're going to walk in, the weather has changed, or you've gone across the mountain and it's dull and raining over there. But it's still useful to fill in the details of the habitat and what management is going on there. So if you come back another time, you've already done that habitat assessment, and like if there are larval food plants there for a particular species. So that's still useful to do, even if the weather's not good enough to see the butterflies. Send in your records in October when the temperatures drop and you won't see the butterflies anymore. And you can send them via email or on paper. If you're all on the computer watching this, so you must be able to send it via email or send a spreadsheet to Cofnod or to me. There we are. Local record centre. It's called Record if you're in Cheshire, and Cofnod, of course, for the whole of North Wales. And they will share records with any other organisation. So you don't need to put the record in more than once. In fact, it can skew the results if you put the records in more than once. So just choose one way to do it and always do that. And if you join Butterfly Conservation, you get lots of information, training courses, guided walks in a normal year. Of course, we haven't had any the last 2 years because of the pandemic. But doing these Zoom sessions has been great. So that's the end of my presentation.